Brene Brown is a professor and researcher at the University of Houston specializing in shame and vulnerability. Her book is called Daring Greatly. What does it mean to dare greatly? Daring greatly is about acknowledging that vulnerability is not weakness, but rather our clearest path to courage. When we allow our authentic selves to be heard and seen, we are courageous and daring greatly. The term daring greatly comes from a speech given by Theodore Roosevelt called The Man in the Arena. It is not the critic who counts, nor the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumphs of high achievement, and at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat.
Life is about connection. There are two groups of people, those who feel worthy of connection and those who do not. So, why don't we feel worthy of connection? Well, Brittany suggests that we live our lives in scarcity. Scarcity is never blank enough, never good enough, never perfect enough, never smart enough, maybe not wealthy enough. We wake up with not enough time in the morning. We get out of bed each day, starting our day out inadequate. So, what is the opposite of scarcity then? What should we strive for? You may think that the opposite of scarcity is abundance, but Brené suggests that the opposite of scarcity is enough, also known as wholeheartedness. Wholeheartedness is what you achieve when you let go of all the baggage that holds you back. Think about what you could do if you let go of all of your self doubt, all of your fears, anxieties, and comparisons. We are constantly bombarded with opportunities to compare our lives, our marriages, our careers to, to what we see on TV or what we see in social media. When we aren't enough, we are in a constant state of scarcity. We don't take risks, we cannot be innovative or creative, and we don't allow those whom we are leading to do so either. It takes courage to say to yourself, no matter what gets done today and how much is left undone, I am enough. When we're enough, we take risks. We dare greatly to live our best lives.
Vulnerability is often completely misunderstood. Just think about how you might define vulnerability. Vulnerability is blank. Generally, people think that vulnerability is something that isn't desirable, a character flaw at best and a critical failure at worst. Regardless of how undesirable you consider vulnerability, it's always equated to one thing: weakness. Being exposed to harm, shame, fear, uncertainty, and every other negative emotion can come from others. Knowing too much about us is what gives vulnerability this second but untrue definition. But vulnerability is not weakness. Vulnerability is the core of all emotions and feelings. Exposing yourself in an authentic way is the essence of vulnerability. Imagine you're pitching your new idea at a board meeting, performing an instrument that you're beginning to learn, writing a letter to a loved one. All of these are acts of vulnerability, acts that require you to be present and authentic, to show up. This isn't weakness, it's strength. Vulnerability is the courage to be authentic in the face of uncertainty. While vulnerability is good and brave, it should be tempered. You don't want to share intimate information with complete strangers. Vulnerability is an act of trust, and trust is built with small acts over a long time. You want to be vulnerable with people who are worthy of that part of you. So, what makes us avoid being vulnerable? Everyone has had an experience where their vulnerability has caused them pain. Gabrielle is going to share how shame negatively affects us all.
Well, first, no one is immune from shame. We've all carried the burden of shame at some point, and we all know how debilitating it can be. When I was a junior in high school, I had to perform a lip sync song in front of my class. Unfortunately, my class was full of the popular crowd. I got up and I did my performance, and I remember staring at the eyes of the people in my audience and seeing nothing. No laughter, no smiles, no validation at all. I wanted to hide. I ran to the bathroom and cried. And looking back, it's interesting to me how early on we learn how to give and receive shame. Take a moment and recall a time when you felt shame. What did it feel like? When we feel this, we can either give into it and let it control us, or we can move through it. I could have requested to be moved to a different class, but I didn't. I wanted to, but I didn't. I had to move through that shame and return to class. I thought it would kill me, but it didn't. That's how we battle shame. We move through it with shame resilience. To quote the author, if we are going to find our way out of shame and back to each other, vulnerability is the path and courage is the light.
There are ways that people can try to protect themselves from shame that are not effective. They are foreboding joy, perfectionism, and numbing. Foreboding joy is an attempt to mentally prepare for inevitable loss. Have you ever seen or been in a moment of great joy and suddenly thought of something terrible happening? This is your mind's way of telling the world, you aren't going to blindside me. But it prevents you from being able to be present and vulnerable. Combat this by practicing gratitude. In the moments of joy, think of how grateful you are to have it. By accepting that you're worthy of these moments as they happen, you'll be able to be wholehearted, living in the moment and driving out the fear of the unknown and what will probably never happen. Perfectionism is the school of thought that says, if I never fail, I can never be hurt. This is a terrible path since everyone is human and no one can go through life without failing, stumbling, or having a learning experience. Perfectionists equate their worth with the degree of their accomplishments. It's a constant effort to please others. Perfectionism can ruin relationships at work, socially, and especially with family. Fight perfectionism by practicing self-kindness. Hold yourself to a realistic standard and forgive yourself for your humanity. When you can accept that your best is good enough, even though it won't be perfect, you open up a whole new world of peace. Wholeheartedness accepts you for who you are and others for who they are. Numbing is the final armor against vulnerability. This is potentially the most harmful. It's seeking to drown out vulnerability with other things. Busyness is a way to drown out vulnerability. Addictions are another. Essentially, it's any behavior that is meant to distract from vulnerability. Avoid numbing through embracing feelings, especially the ones that are hard to feel, and being aware of what your numbing tendencies are. When you lean into the feelings and the shame, you'll go through the steps you need to process them in a healthy way, not through potentially harmful coping mechanisms that can lead to life-altering addictions. In high school, my father was a perfectionist, and it made it hard to be vulnerable with him, and he was never vulnerable with me. On the outside, he seemed like a perfectly healthy family man who was successful and happy, but on the inside, he was falling apart, and so was our relationship. His perfectionism ultimately transformed into numbing in the form of a drug addiction, and it almost cost him his job, his family, and his marriage. Fast forward several years, and he's a recovering addict, practicing vulnerability with his family every day. His marriage is stronger than ever, and so is our relationship. Now he leads addiction recovery groups to help others too.
Wow. So, how does all this tie into leadership? Well, let's look back at an example that we read about earlier in the semester in Leadership and Self-Deception Getting Out of the Box. We met Lou Herbert, the former CEO of Zagram, who realized that he had been a toxic force at his own company, leading Kate, one of his most valued senior executives, to quit. Lou knew that convincing Kate to return was critical to his company's survival, so he went to Kate and he apologized and begged her to return. He allowed himself to become vulnerable, not knowing what her response would be, and in doing so, not only won Kate back, but also showed his entire staff the strength of his vulnerability. Lou and his team dared greatly when they made themselves vulnerable, and in doing so, inspired others to do so also. As leaders, our attitudes become contagious. If we allow ourselves to be seen as vulnerable and respectful, of people who act out of vulnerability, we pave the way for creativity, innovation, and learning. As Brittany says, we can't learn when our heads are down and our mouths are shut.
We will leave you with the thoughts of the people you may one day lead. This is called the Daring Greatly Leadership Manifesto by Brene Brown. To the CEOs and teachers, to the principals and the managers, to the politicians, community leaders, and decision makers.
We want to show up. We want to learn. We want to inspire.
We are hardwired for connection, curiosity, and engagement.
We crave purpose. And we have a deep desire to create and contribute.
We want to take risks, embrace our vulnerabilities, and be courageous.
When learning and working are dehumanized, when you no longer see us and no longer encourage our daring, or when you only see what we produce or how we perform, we disengage and we turn away from the very things that the world needs from us, our talent, our ideas, and our passion.
What we ask is that you engage with us, show up beside us, and learn from us.
Feedback is a function of respect. When you don't have an honest conversation with us about our strengths and our opportunities for growth, we question our contributions and your commitment.
Above all else, we ask that you show up, let yourself be seen, and be courageous. Dare greatly with us.
Thank you.